corpo de barrage, you spoof of visibility in a freak fog of mixed sex cases among goats, hill cat, and plain mousey. Bigamy Bob and his ill shan that. The Blackfriars treacle plaster outrage belittled. Therewith was released in that king's rick of hill media, a poisoning volume of cloud barrage indeed. Yet are they who heard nor re-delivered are now with that family of bards and Virgo Bretas himself, and the crowd of caraculacticers as much no more as be they not yet now, or had they then not ever been. Can be in some future we shall hear amid the zouave players of Inkerman, the Mime, Mum and the Mick, and his Nick, Mime and their Maggies, Hinton St. Just, Mr. Frank Smith, Yvonne St. Austell, Mr. J.F. Jones, Coleman of Lucan taken four parts, a choiry of the O'Daly O'Doyles double sixing the chorus in Fen MacLeod and the Seven Fairies of Lockleach, Galloper Trottler and Hurley Quinn, the zither of the past with his merry men all, zim zim, zim zim. Of the persons in this here Wigler saga, which thorough readable to int from ant is from Tudge Bodden, all false tissues, anti-libelous and non-actionable, and this applies to its whole volume. Of poor Osty Frosty, described as quite a musical genius in a small way, and the owner of an exceedingly nice ear, with tenorous voice to match, not alone but a very major poet of the poorly meritary order. He began to Unisonian, but worked his passage up as far as that we all hang together any man the voice. No one end is known. If they whistled him before he had his curtains up, they are whistling him still after his curtains doom's doom. His husband, poor old O'Hara, crestfallen by things, and down at hills at the time they squeak, except at the Zasnach, Adri's Shillen, at the conclusion of the Crimean War, and having flown his wild geese, alone in crowds to wander on like Shuley Looney, enlisted in Tyrone's horse, the Irish Whites, soldiered a bit with Wolsey under the assumed name of Blanco Fuzalovno Buklovich. Spurious. After which the coward and the marble house of Pumpcourt Columbarium, the home of the old Seekings, looked upon each other and quaithed their haven evermore. For it transpires that on the other side of the water it came about that on the field of Vasilov's Cornix, inauspiciously with his unit, he perished, saying, "This paper leafless to old chap give, raw chocolates from Mowther and Low." Bewill. Poor old dear Paul Horan, to satisfy his literary as well as his criminal aspirations, at the suggestion thrown out by the doomster in loquacity lunacy, so says the Dublin intelligence, was thrown into a Ridley's for inmates in the northern counties. Under the name of Orony, he may have been the utility man of the troop capable of sustaining long parts at short notice. He was. So did Sam, a dour, decent deblancer, the unwashed, haunted always by his ham, the unwished. At a word from Israfel the summoner, passed away painlessly after life's ups and downs one Halloween night, ebrus and in a state of nature, propelled from behind into the great beyond by foot blows, cowling clouted upon his oyster and Atlas on be hanged and be hooved and be hicked and be hooked of his last fish and blood bed scrappers, an Northwegian and his mate of the she-wolf in class. Though the last straw glimpsed his bearing, the stage thunk hard to sell. The pitfall had gagged him as prompt boxer to have solemnly said, as had the brief thought, but fell into his head like a base drop neck fussed into the bone crate. Cogged. Me dreams on Loughlin's has come through. Now let the centupled selves of my ego urge, as Miculus the accuser calls them, of all of whose I in my hereinafter, of course by recourse, dimission me. By the coincidence of their contraries re-amalgamerge in that indentity of undiscernibles, where the Baxters and the Fleshmans may they cease the benevolence, and... But at this point, though the iron thrust of his cocksport start might have prepared us, we're well nigh stink pathered by the mustard punch in his tail end. This out tanned and brown candlestock melt Nolans into peas, and var. and disliking as he was the drury old drama, her wife Langley, the prophet, and the dace with this dozen short of a flusker, whoever stuck his spicker through his spoke, disappeared. In which to do it, he has taken all the French leaves unavailable out of calumny Quiller's pravities from the sour face of this earth that outstood plain he had transmarried himself to so entirely spuriously. The mother of the book, with a dusk whisk tabula res in his obliteration done upon her and volucrum, has to tickle the speculative to all but a point, since the levy, who might have been Langley, may have really been a redevivis of Pagan, and it's a more volunteer fool's den that the hobo, who possessed a large amount of the humoresque, had transtuled his funster's latitat to its finsterest and terramost. Riche. Again, if Father Sam Brown, tea and toaster to that quaintest of yarn spinners, is Padre Don Bruno, true and troster to the Queen of Irish Spain, was the Reverend, the sodality director, that eupeptic voice flare, a barefaced Carmelite, to whose palpitating pulpit, which of us but remembers that rare, valent and honourable Fredo Mr. Northern Morning Brawn, sin in society, sirens, see the Roman Catholic Presbyterian, fortunately became so enthusiastically attached, and was an objectionable ass who very occasionally cockaded a raffles ticket on his hat, which he wore all to one side like the handle of his pan. If her elegance saw him, she'd have the canary. And was semi-privately convicted of malpractices with his hot-washed table knife, glossing over the cork in his pocket, that the same snob of the dunghill, fully several years showns riper, encountered by the General on that red letter morning or May noon Jove's Day, and were they? Few it. When Fishlin Phil once throws his lip, 'tis folly to be fortune fountain, and whoever's got the mixed hotel by the salt sea water, there's next to nothing we can do, for he's never again to see. It is nebulous and autodidact fact of the commonest that the shape of the average human cloudy fizz, whereas Sallow's long days faded, frequently altered its ego with the passing of the showers. Not original. Whence it is a slopperish matter, given the wet and low visibility, since in this skirts are that of 1,190 nesses, that sword of certainty, which would identify the body, never falls. To identifying the individual one in scratch wig, square cut, stock lavalier, regattable Exeter, baggy pants and shufflers, he is often alluded to as Sly Patrick, the lad in the lane, with an already incipient lust in the direction of area baldness. One is continually first meeting with odd sorts of others at odd sorts of ages, who was asked by free board school shirkers in trench coats over a wall, Will Con and Adam, to tell them over the gate, Vol Pop Dev, that fisher-bed goat story of the hardy creditable Edlin tires of the haberdasher, the 2 courtiers and the 3 ankle chums in their bearskin goats, girls and youngers. But he has changed a lot since Tark's time. Yada tra gallery pen shows and shows of that okey boko night. Those many warts, those slummy patches have since their wrinkles. What has come over the face of whole brother E? And shrine of Mount Newsavers, the large fungal parky has grown. Drink. Sport's a common thing. It was the Lord's own day for Dap. To wait for a postponed regatta's eventualising is not of Battlecock, Shettledore, Euxtamari only. And the request for a fully armed explanation was put, in lieu of Pat, to the party. A native of Meathman or Meccan, by his brogue, ex-race eyes, local colour and local odour, which are said to have been average clown Turkish. Though the capeless voice, nasal liquids, and the way he sneezed its ears haul us back to the crows and brins of the Silurian Ordovices, who, the lesser pilgrimage accomplished, had made pets and pigs older than Celt, the southeast bluffs of the stranger step shore, a regifugium persecutorum, hence hindquarters. as he paused at even chime for some or so minutes. Hit the pipe, Danny boy. Time to one, barman. I take 10 to win. Amid the devil's one doldrum, Apple by her blossom window, and Charlotte at her toss panamancy, his sole admirers, his only tarts in store. For a fragrant calabash during his weekend pastime of executing with any ugly deadliness. Consummatory pairs of provocatives, of which remain provokingly but two, the ones he fell for, Lily and Tutu, Corkum. Empties which had not very long before contained Reed's family. You ruined that before, Sulky, but all the battles in sodden history will not soften your blood of thirst. Stout. Having reprimed his repeater and rested around his timepiece, his revenances was still a life or two to spare for the space of his occupancy of a world at a time, rose to his feet, and there, far from Togaheim, in a quiet English garden, commonplace, since known as Whittington Wild, his simple, intensive, curling vocality, my dear brothers, my most dear brothers, as he, so is a supper as is a sipper, spake of the one, and told of the compassionate, called up before the trident precocious scare-makers, score taken, spegging on ne help as a nabellulo, mi credas qui estas prava, via do televisago. Respondas Fräuleino, the now to us here mythical habiliments of our far, far, and our thought of our doing. Television kills telephony and brothers broil. Our eyes demand their turn. Let them be seen. And wolf-bone balefires blaze with frail most if that Mary nothing may burst her bibby book she. And they set fire, then she's got to glow, so we may stand some chances of warmth with every circa batch of tum or hum would like to know. The first Humphrey's latitudinous beaver with puggery behind. Calaboose belong, big boss belong, Kang the tall, his forehand bow, his elbow room sort out, the refaced unmentionables of gingerine hue, the state slate umbrella, his gruff Wolseley Wellesley with the Findrin crofts and the gauntlet upon the hand, which in an hour not for him solely evil had struck down the mighty might have been there, of whom his nation seemed almost already to be about to have need. Then, stealing his thunder, but in the befitting legomena of the smaller country, probable words, possibly said, a field, family gleaming, a bit duskish and flavoured with a smile, seeing as how his thoughts consisted chiefly of the cheerio. The aptly sketch for our soon-to-be second parents, sucking sea wipe, the touching scene, the solence of that stilling. Here one might have Finn fell, Bloomsday a bum on. It seemed like a landscape from Wilder Picturesque or some scene on some dim arras, dumb as mum's mutinous. This image of the 77th cousin of Christensen is audible to us across the windless air, no odor, no more eerie, nor less potent of suggestion than in the tales of the Tingmount. Prigged. And there oftafter, jauntyjogging on an Irish vis-a-vis, and steadily with shoulder to shoulder, Jehu will tell to Christian year, saint to sage, the Humphreyad of that fall, and rise, while Daisy winks at her pinker sister among the tussocks, and the couple between the shafts mocks the couple on the car, And as your hill may look like how on the outer side of his big bell, dry your tears and close your nose, and paradigm may rise in early. Follow we up his whip vindicative thirstons. Lo be bold, la arboro, la patruzu, the Augustan, peace be to them oaks. The monolith rising stark from the moonlit pine barren, and all fortitudinous Ajaxius round a noisy tenuosity. The Angelus hours, with ditchers bent upon their far-mused tensiles, the soft belling of the fallow deers, doremus genuine, advertising their milky approach as midnight was striking the hours, the tardy. And how brightly the great tribune outed the sharkskin smoke wallet. Imitation. From his frack kippers. And by Joshua he tips on a top and swank cheeroot. None of your swellish sword, quite the divorce. Now manfully he says, pluck to pluck and lecking for Lucan. It was just pluggy well, suck that brown boy or my son, and spend a whole half hour in Nevada. Sorer of the creeks men. Not there be old high got sprog. Wherefore he met master, he mean to say, he do, sire, best of republicans, at Eagle Cock Hostel on Lorenzo Tooley Street, and how he wished his honour the bannocks of Gort Maw, and Bridehead and Putty Rick, your lordship, and a starch box sitting in a pit of St. Thomas. Strange wish for you, my friend. They would poleaxe your son's grandson utterly. Though your own old sweat and swear flow rule runs heaved at hock many as the times when they were terrified by the hits. Cheers for up King Billy and Crow Crew Cranwell's down a bill. Hot boys and hot him. See, I've been there last week, foundry Rembrandtsters, they're ours today, link these ears to hear, but where are those yours of yesterdays? Far since the rich and poor old woman, character cousin is Anne Van Vogt, D-A-A-D. Ned, ended, or sleeping soundlessly. Favour with your tongues, intendite. Any dog's life you list, you may still hear them at it, like 60s and 70s, as ever sure as Halley's Comet. Mom and Sabra and Jill woman starting boys and dimmer girls, as they pass its bleak and bronze portal of your Casa Concordia. Romani, many flickens. Poor ladies, hardly dead. Lost out and left my lady's queue. Milia cento regente due scudi. Tipati, kiri, tipati. Chaka erotica in a carsa here. Dispense me usted, signor, on something goes up. Atabrano, Macari, thinking now gaily. A lake pie fly high, palissila lang. Epialo, ecupatiste, tu vas venir dans l'appétit boing. Is même de boombark, amirs de Portocali. Oh? Oh? Os people's meals are demasiado grasso, poro, piccolo pochino. Wifi, duro, caxis abad, mercy and you, goma tak. And God, says he, with mugger's tears, would you care to know the prize of a liard? Magus Nick, your nighty novel. Mast having us at the mic again, and that bag belly as a buck to goat it. Gay chappy fellow, I call on our universe to witness. As sicker as my liffey eggs is known by our good householders from your hundreds of mammoth degree, which they commercially are in a high British quarters. Conventional. My guest house and Cahir credits will immediately stand open, as straight as that neighbouring monument's fabrication before the hygienic guild. This was where the Reverend Sabbath and Bottlebreaker, with fair bark far stretched, touched upon his tie-coloured boater, which he uplifted by its pickled hoopy, He gave Stetson more than a penny for it. While as all the tenacity of Anstralosus scodulated down the appendices of his muscle-hito lip-tails. San Capitulo, and more Modestius considered you happy like never curled a torn pocket mouse. Cordially inviting the adolescents who he was rising up to do in like manner, what all did, so he was able to add lobe before the great schoolmasters. I tell you no story. Smile. The house of Atriox is fallen indeed dust. Iliam ilium. Me Roma mono mates. Verging on blight like the Monday banks of Feniana. But deeds bound's gonna rise again. Life, he himself said once. His biography, in fact, kills him very soon, if yet not after. Is awake. Live at a cricket. And on the bunk of our breadwinning lies the crops of our seed father. A phrase which the establisher of the world by law might pregnantly write across the chest front of all man or woman born. The scene, refreshed, reroused, never to be forgotten. The hen and crusader ever intermutuum mergent. For later in that century, one of that puny band of fact ferreters, then annexed civilly, out of the custom huts, retired, hurt, under the 65s Act, in a dressy black modern style, and we wear shiny tam Burlingtons, tam Hond and Dicky, quipricros and pijagged, rehearsed it, paper-pointing, with a dignified, copied bow to a name cousin of the late Archdeacon F.X. Preserved Coppinger, a hot fellow in his night, may the mother of the guard have mastic on him, in a poll woman of our first Trans-Hibernian, with one still sadder circumstance, which is a Dirk and Dirk heart skewer, ever to bring bouncing blimmers from marbled eyes, cycloptically through the window discs, and with eddying ahs, the round eyes of the run-risers back to back, book to book around their Irish chaunting car, beheld with interesting interestedness the clad pursue the bear the green the floor the clad again, as their convoy wheeled encirclingly about the gigantic life tree, our fire-leaf lover-lucky Bloomsday bomb, Phoenix in our woodlessness, hearty, cacuminal, erubescent, repetition, whose roots they be ashes with lustres of pains. As often as they arch a cadence, pleasing aside his Irish field, craving their auriculars to receptacle particulars before they got the bump of Castlebar, Mat and Fire, spoke of it by request all, hearing in this new reading of the part whereby, because of Deus and his machina, the new Garrix and Grimacel and Grimmel is hypostasized by a substantiation the axiomatic rotundity of that once grand old Ellington ball. The copycast's description of that fellow cubimeter's play upon countenance could simply imagine themselves in their bosoms inmost cars, pro tem locums, time sported a course of yawning abyss, as once they were seasiders, listening to the cockshy shooter's even-song evocation of the doom, but always ventriloquent agitator. No more blanger bound the billows or tune of a holly reef. Silk-watted, the walrus might I add, against the dusk of Scumring. Would that fain be St. Moesan's calling, holy places, and this face brimless brow, faithful toucher of the ground, I wish it were. Blessed be the bones, the gazi, power of his sword, his manslayer's gun leader pretended towards that overgrown lead pencil which was soon, monumentally at least, to rise as Malleave de Condylan to be his mausoleum. Oh, Dan stood tail-stained and Macy's eyes could show upon, while all over his exculpatory features, as Roland rung, the way dropping of grief, that the Silenizes juju. A ghost of resignation diffused a spectral appealingness, as a young man's drown over the fate of his waters may gloat, similar in origin and accurate and effective to a beam of sunshine upon a coffin plate. Not otherwise in the days of the beginning would our traveller remote, unfriended, from Van Diemen's land, some lazy skald or mandering pote, lift weary willy slow-cut snubsick eyes to the semi-signs of his zodiac, and lengthening, lingering along flask neck, cracked cup, downtrodden brogue, turf sod, wild broom, cabbage blad, stock fish. Longingly learned that there at the Angel were her birds for him, poteen and tea, praties and baccy, wine with woman words warbling, and informally quasi begin to press a smile, to quaze a thin. Nonsense. There was not very much windy news blowing at the given moment through the hat of Mr. Melancholy Slow. But in the pragma, what form or cause made a smile of that, to think? Who is he to whom? Oh, Brain's not his name, though the brown one is made. Whose are the place where's? Kawasti, Kister, Kither, Kit, no budget. Dar the dam of the tumulum, give the gab of the groob, be it cudgel players' country, or fish fellows' town, or leek lickers' lang, pang panungo, povin Gresky. What regnans raised, the rains have levelled. Now we hear the pointers and can gauge their compass, for the menos yields the mould, and the more the manners blaze him and plans him and plows him and blab, teaching. The forefather funkers for the prize of 2 peaches, with Ming Ching and Johnny on the loy lowly. We'll sit down on the hope with the ghoulie ghost, for the tideman troubleth, but his hand to that high's not here. The answer from the Zorns, hear the 4 of them, hark to roar of them. Aye, says our ma, and a proud lot. Aye, says Clonakilty, God help us. Aye, says Dean's Grange, and say nothing. Aye, says Barn, and what about it? Oh. Before he fell the hill, he filled heaven. A stream, a lapping stream, and coil them cool of our curls. Well, what termites then? We. Our antheap we sensed as a hill of Allen, a barrow for in people, one yawn its fail, and it was a grum along the park troop that wonder struck us as a thunder yonder. Thus the unfacts, did we possess them, are too imprecisely few to warrant our certitude. The evidence givers by Legpole too untrustworthily irreparable, whereas the juggers are seemingly freak 3s, but it's due to candy, plainly -2s. Nevertheless, Madame's de Shaw's waxes largely more life-liked. Entrance 1 kudos, exits free, and our notional gullery is now completely complacent, an exegious monument, early perennius. Oblige with your black note. Damps the grace, and there many have paused before that exposure of him by old Tom Quad, a flashback in which he sits sated, gowned about, in clericalese habit, watching Bland's all slide dudsomely into the nethermore. A globule of marliness about the corrugated mild-dewed cheek, and the tata of a tiny Victorian Alice, pressed by his limper looser. Yet certes one is. There the following winter I'd overread the pages of Nature's book, until cheered over that Clea became the bleeding Torsha, the shadow of a huge outlander, Maledic Mulvold Magnopolis, had bulked at the bar of a rota of tribunals, in Manor Hall as in Thieves' Kitchen, mid pillow talk and chickhouse chat. On Marlborough Green as through Molesworth Field, here sentence pro-tried with Jedburgh justice. There acquitted, contesting me with benefit of clergy. His thing maud have undone him. His mad thing has done him, man. His beneficiaries are legion in the part he created. They numbered up his years. Great Wheel Dunlop was on name, was on it. They hung away on his boy's ackles. As holiday in his house, or was he priest and king to that? Ulvy came. Envy saw. Ivy conquered. Loo, they have waved his green boughs o'er him as they have torn him limb from limb, for his mortification and expiration and damnation and annihilation, with tries and greed are deep profound suspirs, steady Sullivans, mannikins pause, long tongues breeches falling down, but granny spreads abroad. Do stay for daily ones and fear the flukers boss, for the total of your floats is not fit to fat his fetlow. I was ring and sing wa, chin chin, and of course I chimed in with the utmost boviality, swiping rums and bones and sherries and ciders and neggers and citronades too, the strongers. Oh, Mr. Beg, you're about to be bagged in the bog again, bug. But softies, sooth side, for gases. But lo, by the thrennin gods, human, erring, and condonable. What the statues of our Kuo? Who is the mischief be our Kuang? Sure there. The unforgettable tree shade looms up behind the jostling judgments of those, as all should know, more incapturable days. Tap and pat and tapatagain. Fire for shot, Monsieur le Fusiliers. Ping pong for Saxaluti. 3 tonics, soldiers free, Cockaleek and Capapee of the cold stream. Guards were walking in, pardon me, je vous en prie, Montgomery Street. One voiced an opinion on which either way, pardon, nodding, all the finner camps concord. Je vous en prie, It was the first woman, they said, souped him that fatal Wellish day. Lily Conningham's, by suggesting him they go in a field. Roth Maud Elfar, Ruthred still stand. Wrath racked Ross, confessed Private Pat Markison retro. Thus contenters with Santoy's play. One of our coming Vauxhall on the boards, who is resting for the moment, she has been called by a noted stagey elocutioner, a waist-packet sittins, was interviewed in a West End pewty parlour, looking perhaps even more pewty flushed in her cherry-derry Padua size, girdle and braces by the half-moon and 7 stars, russets from the blackamoor's head, amongst the climbing boys, and his eagle and child, and over the corn, and he enters at the black and all black, Mrs. F.A. set aside, half in stage of whisper to her confidant Glass, while recuperating her cartwheel chaplet. A hat! We now know what timbers are back at Nonance at Tasmane. She hoped Sid Arthur would get a Christmas portrait of orange, lemon-sized orchids with hollies in ether, from the theatre of the innocent, as the world had been uncaned. Then, while it is odorous comparissoning to the sprang flowers of his birthdays, which was a veritable garden potty for the rainworms and the charlatinas and all branches of climatitis. It has been such a wonderful night entirely. Added she, with many regards to Maha's plangipansies. Tot! Prehistoric. Obedient to his dictaphone and endocrinologist. His proper nomen is Properus Menom. A dustman, named 7 churches in the employ of Messrs. Ashbourne, Saltpetre and Ashreborn prayer makers Glintaluke, was asked by the sisterhood the vexed question during his midday collation of lever and buckram, alternatively with stink and kidney foy and a hash out, and thank heaven responded impulsively. We're just been propaganda in his nullity suit and what they took out of his ear, the mum my own crush. All our fellow in O'Day sages with Arthur Callum Here's a cemented brick bucket on. A more nor usually sober car driver, who was jauntily hosing his runabout, Ginger Jane took a strong view. Lord, he hosed her as he talked, and this is what he told me, right, man. Oh, Acre is just a plain thing trying to reform me in private life. But folks all have it by Brahmin's laws. He has parliamentary honours. The Scaffier, said Luigi. You know that man's brilliant savoir. Ma foi, you wish to have some omelette? Yes, lady. Good, my labour. Your egg, he must break himself. See, I crack. So, he's sitting up a well, unbedimmed. A perspirer over 60 who was keeping up his tennises panted. He know how hard to collect them for Matthews. But diff pair, Flanders, climb wall and trespassing on doorbell. After full-blown Braddon, hear this fresky trotterella, a railway barmaid's view, and they call her Spiltear's rule, was thus expressed to sympathisers of the dull-line Death Avenue, and then those objects of her pity-prompted ministrants, to wet man in siphon. 'Tis ever too late to whistle when Phyllis floods so stable. It would be scarlet shame to jail him in lock-up, as was proposed to him by the Sedum's creature. What matter what merry tricks went off with his revolver in connection with him being an orphan and enjoining such wicked ills him? Well done, Drumcollar Keel! Kitty Tyrrell is proud of you, was the reply of a BOT official. No blame gnut the board, while the daughters Benkletter murmured in unison, "God forgive his dirty legs." Brian Linsky, the cub curser, was questioned in his shouting box, ball on a braggot, and gave a snappy comeback when saying, "Pah! Once more I'd hell bowl. I am for caveman chase and Sahara sex. Bork ya! Them two bitches ought to be leashed. Cane 'em! Up hog and Harhood! Pah!" A would-be martyr who was attending on Senator's situs where he had been taught to wear bracelets, when grilled on the point, revealed the undoubted fact that the consequence would be that as long as Mundi played his mango tricks under the misty tree, with shady Apsaras sheltering in his leaves license and his shadowers terrified by the potent bolts of interdiction, there would be fights all over Cuxhaven. Tosh. Missioner Ida Wombwell, the 17-year-old revivalist, said concerning the coincident of interphysic with grenadines and other respectable and disgusted persons using the park, that perpendicular person is a brute, but a magnificent brute. Caligula, Mr. Daniel McGraw, bookmaker, well known to Australian poor users of the Sydney Parade Bulletin, was as usual antipodal with his striving to die, happening to mellow, where splash cobbler. "We have meet 2 hours," sang out El Captain Boy Count, with the famous Padres Toreadors Cape Cast. "Meet 2 hourly, Matadeer." Dan Michael John, precentor of SS Smack and Ollies, was proverbial with his upsy-duxy mutatus mutandos. Darren's Lord, sniff pox, Morgan's lady, flatter fun, took sides and crossed, and bowed to each other's views, and recrossed themselves. The dirty dubs up in their flies went too free. Echoed the dainty drabs down in their sanities. Ooh, Mona. Sylvia Silence, the girl detective, Minerva. But by now one hears turtlings all over Doveland, when supplied with informations as to the several facets of the case in her cosy-dozy bachelor's flat, quite overlooking John O'Dream's muse, leaned back in her really, truly easy chair to query restfully through her vowel-threaded syllables. Have you ever thought, reporter, that sheer greatness was his tragedy? Nevertheless, according to my considered attitudes for this act, he should pay the full penalty, pending pursuance as per subsect 32, section 11 of the CLA Act 1885, anything in this act to the contrary notwithstanding. Charlie Jilk began to say, for he couldn't get on to Chelsea, but ended with, "Oh, he's got the sack that helped him out instead of his gladsome rags." Meagre, a naval rated, seated on one of the granite cromlech sets of our new fish ambers for the usual ale eaten after the ever-popular act, with whom were Cuesta and Puella, piquant and quoit. This had a cold in her brain, while that felt a sink in her stomach, with what's wet was encouraged, although near vanished himself, by one of his coffee ads to get your breath wilt and cop it. And when they're chidden by her fast disaster to saddle up your pants, Neville. Thus Cahir replied to her others, thanks kissing. I lay my 2 finger buttons, fiancé Megger. He speaks. He was to blame about your 2 velvet eyes up Hornyman's Hill. As how can I blame him or any other pisk man? But I also think, Pwelly Wally, by the siege of his trousers, there was someone else behind it. About your bottom blarneys. About your 3 drummers down Keesar's Lane. Trite. Be these mere marching tailors' fablings of a race referend with odd man Rex? Is now all seen, heard, and forgotten? Can it was, one is fain in this leaden age of letters now to wit, that so diversified outrages, they have still to come, were planned and partly carried out against so staunch a covenant, or if it be true that any of those recorded ever took place, from any we trow, be yes to and in aid of, are given to us by some who use the truth but sparingly, and we on this side ought to sorrow for their pricking pens on that account. The 7th city, the Oro Vivla, the citadel of refuge, whither would we believe the laymen and their counts, beyond the outraged gales of Adriatic, changing clues with the beggar monster, the Heterite had fled, silent under night's alto sonority, ship alone, raven of the wave, be mercy Mara, he whence Rahulus, from the Osman's Dirtby on the old Vic, to forget and expiate manslaughter, and rebirthing in remerriment out of dead sickness to divine providence. If you are looking for the builder, deep your ear on the movie town, to league his lot, Pam and Pat, with a papishly. From my gavin I thee if taken by my husband I thee hatter. There was to be land, a luxurious land, a luxurious land, emerald illum, the peasant pasture, in which by the 4th commandment with promise his days apostolic were to belong by the abundant mercy of him which thundereth from on high, murmured, would rise against him, with all which in the world franchisables and inhabitants as the Azagora, Eelit, Fillet, do him hurt, poor chink, ghostly following bodily, as were he made a curse for them, the corruptible quick, saints of incorruption of unholy nation, the commoner air in garden cast away, and red resurrection to condemn, so they might convince him, first Pharaoh, Umpharis, Cheops, Exarchus, of their proper sins. Business bred to speak with a stiff upper lip to all men, and most occasions the man we want of took little short of fighting chances, but for all that he or his care were subjected to the horrors of the premier terror of our land. Perhaps we seem to us, the real us, to be reading our Amenti in the 6th sealed chapter of the Going Forth by Black. It was after the show at Wednesbury that one tall man, humping a suspicious parcel, when returning late amid a dense particular on his home way from the second house of the Bull and Burgess Christie ministers by the old spot, Rose Corner, had a Barkus revolver placed to his face with the words, "You're shot, Major," by an unknowable assailant, masked, against whom he'd been jealous over, not a Crabtree or Pomona Evelyn. More than that, when the whaleer, not a Leucolizard diocesan or even of the Glendalough Sea, but hailing from the prow of Little Britain, mentioning in a by the way that he, the cross-upper, in addition to Reed's cutlass centre blade, a loaded Hobson's, which left only twin alternatives as vice versa. Either he would surely shoot her, beyond, by pistol. She could be okay sure of that. Or failing of such, bash and patch his blank face beyond recognition. Pointed the ass with Gaelish go what business Thornton had with that Kane's fender, only to be answered by the aggravated assaulted that was the snaps for him mid-weeks to sultry well go and find out if he was surely well able. But how transparently non-true, gentle writer. His feet one is not a tall man, not a tall man. No such parson, no such fender, no such lumber, no such race. Was it supposedly in connection with a girl, Miriam Huey or Colores Archer, under Flaggy Bridge, for and there is but one living her new bridges are old? Or to explode his 12-chamber and force a shrievalty entrance at the heavy built body in a butcher blue blouse from one life, one suit, the man who wears store, with the most decisive bottle of single in his possession, seized after dark by the town guard at Have You Got Eminence Temperance Gateway, was there in the gate's way. Fifthly, how Paris soliloquizingly true-toned on his first time of hearing the wretched statement that muttering Irish he'd had gloriously a lot too much hangast, or else you find the drink in the house of blazes, the parrot in hell, the orange tree, the glib, the sun, the holy lamb, and laps not least. In Ramathan's ship hotel since the morning moment he could distinguish a white thread from a black till the engine of the laws closed under Murray, and was only falling filled the fluted up against the Gatestone Pier, which, with the cow's bonnet atop of it, he fast up for a caterpillar with purest peace of blessed intentions. Yet how lamely hobbles the hoy of his then pseudo-Joe Cox explanation. Now, according to his own story, he was a process server and was merely trying to open Zosamos a bottle of stout by martially hammering his mangum bunum the court of the club, the sword, the savage, against the bloody gate, for the boots about the swan Marty's behind, who hastily into his shoes with his bell barrett tintiac and came down with hump, step and jumping to the tilt yard from the waist asleep with his only overcloser choker, attracted by the noise of guns trained to Landy, his cartager on the regular rock to Dublin, said war prize safe in bed as he dreamed that in Wales and Mormon halls, when woken by a fourth loud snore out of his land to be yellow, where extra's maws were grazing in the moonlight, my hearing hammering on the pandywax scale emanating from the blind pig, and anything like it. And all this three of them on a cannon he never. His battering babble allowed the doors and signposts, he always said, was not in the very remotest like the bellsy babble of a bottle of booze, which would not rouse him out of a slumber deep, but reminded him loads more of the martial arts in Mars's foreign music cants instruments, or the overthrow of the last days of Pompery, if anything. Not after this most meaningless nocturne, the young wren came down desperate. Lift the bottom and started clawing all over the plains as mud as she could be, ruinating all the butcher shorts and the backers whisking tugs, so that be the chandelier of the Regina Jailey. They were all night wasking the waters off, the weltering waters off. White. Just one moment. A pension time of the ideal musketeers. Alphonse, Borcas and Caramus, leave Australia for the astrologeries and for the love of the sciences and the honours of Kevin's Pike, pullywhack back to Pam and Tull, and roll away the real world, the real world, the real world. Call all your smoke blushes Snow White and Rose Red, and you will have the real cream. Now for a strawberry frolic. Filons, filouche, cherchons la flamme. Fam, 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 fam. Come on, our dirty bad with that large, big, knobbly head. And that Blanco Borbeck Fiscal Express Jan Machinsky Scarpalopolis Duzanaski or other. Your match or mutton legs get muscle bound from being too pulled. Now a beard he weighed stone 1001 when Hazel was a hen. Now her fat's fallen fast. Therefore, chat bags, why not yours? There are 29 sweet reasons why blossom time's the best. Elders fall for green almonds when they're raised on blue stone root ginger, though it winters on their heads as if walked them round their waistbands. If you'd had your pains in your hairs, you wouldn't look so orgy bald. You'd have Collie McHairs on your lump of lead. Now listen, Mr. Lear, and stow that sweaty, funny Adam Sipper. Take an old geezer who calls on his skirt. Note his sleek hair, so elegant. Tableau vivant. He vows her to be his own honey lamb, swears they will be pals by Sam, and share good times way down west in a guaranteed happy love nest. When May moon she shines, and they twinkle all the night, combing the comet's tail upright and shooting pop guns at the stars. Cream puffs all to dime. Every nice Missy Mackenzie's. For dear old Grandpapa, he's gone on the razzle-dazzle through gazing and crazing and blazing at the stars. Comprie. She wants her wardrobe to hear from above by return with cash, so she can buy her Peter Robinson trousseau and cut a dash with Artie Burt or possibly Charlie Chance. Who knows? So tell her, Mr. Hunker, you do dada for me to dance. So off she goes. And that's how half the girls in town has got their bottom drawers, while Grandpapa's trying to hitch his braces onto his trousers. But oh, Grum, he's not so clean dippy between sweet you and young. Not on your life, boy. On those trousers. Not by a large jugful. For someplace on the sly, where for fields and by, old Grum has his gal number 2. Brave thou, Grum! And he would like to canoodle her too some part of the time, for he is downright fond of his number 1. But oh, he's fair mashed on Peach's number 2. So that if you could only canoodle the 2, shavu, all 3 would feel genuinely happy. It's as simple as A, B, C. The 2 mixers women with their cherry bum chappy, for he is simply sham and dippy. If they were all afloat in a dream lifeboat, hugging 2 by 2 in his zoo do you do, a tofter for thee, missy for me, and how came you and so for farmer in his tippy up and down dippy, tip-toppy canoodle, can you? Finny. That. With which clap, trap, and sodden, 3 to a love. Our mutual friends, the fender and the bottle at the gate, seem to be implicitly in the same boat. So the singing. Bearing also several of the earmarks of design. For there is in fact no use in putting a tooth in a snipery of that sort. The amount of all those sorts of things which has gone on once a day and twice a day out every other knack a stack among all kinds of promiscuous individuals at all ages in private homes and rebooze public kiss and all over all and elsewhere throughout secular sequence the country over and over abroad has been particularly stupendous. To be continued. Federal United Transport Unions for exultation of triumphant ecstasy. But resuming inquiries. Will it ever be next morning the Postal Unionists, officially called Carrier's Letters Scotch Limited? Strange fate. Fierce and giddy axes height the lousel that hooks around Mrs. Maid's gummy backs to hand in a huge chain envelope written in 7 diverse stages of ink, from blanche essence to lavender, yet every pocket and pan crook bespaking the wisher wife. Superscribed and sub-penciled by yours, a laughable party, with after-right SAT to hide-and-seek Edinburgh, Dublin, WC. Well, whatever be written in Lappish language, Inverse, Magyar, or Simpose, black, looking white garden black, in that Siamex to attack used Twist, Storm, Swift, and Jolly Roger? Will it bright upon us nightle, and we plunging to our plight? Well, it might now, Marceau. So it light. Always and ever till Cox's wife, twice Mrs. Hahn, pokes a beak into the matter without a day after. See, what was mother after? Will this cannabis pouch filled with litter's fragments lurk dormant in the punch of that out brother of a a pillar box? The coffin. triumph of the illusionist's art. At first Blanche, naturally taken for a hand harp, and his hand warped to try distinguish Jubei from Jebul, or either from Tibet, when all three have just been invaded, had been removed from the hardware premises of Ertzman and nephew, a noted house of the Gonbost West, which in the natural course of all things continues to supply funeral requisites of every needed description. Why needed, though? Indeed, needed. And you feel like a Rattenfeld if you hadn't the Oscar. Because the flash brides, or bride in their lily boleros win games with the newly nibbies, finery ball, and your upright grooms that always come right up with you. And by jingo, when they do. What else in this mortal world, now ours, when meet their night, mid their nacht, me their naked, mid their naughty hour strikes, would bring them right back in the flesh, thumbs down to their arses and their hashes. To proceed, we might leave that nutrients of oxygen to take its free of the air and just unelectrise that very chimerical combination, the gas bag where the water works. Try to pour some more heiter seed up the almost fair. And the bottled helio case continue. Long lally tub kids especially, sporting a fine breast of medals, and a conscientious scripture reader to boot in the brick and tin church round the corner, swore like an Orpheus tailor on the stand before the proper functionary. He was up against a right queer snort of a man in the butter of the blues, who we continued. And last evening, after delivering some carcasses, mat and chips and meat jukes on behalf of Messrs. Otto Sands and Eastman Limerick victuallers, went in, with his unmitigated astonishment, he kicked at the dun and Doris against all the runes, and when challenged about the pretended it was kick up and down with him. And his solemn, by his imputed, said simply, I oath, Philip's captain, you did, as I stressed before. You are deeply in error, sir. Madam Tomkins, let me then tell you, replied with a gentlewomanly salam McPartlin, the Meatman's family, and the oldest in the world except Nick, name. And Phelps was playful with his peeler, but his fizz fell. Now to the obverse. From velveteen sedimities is barely a 5-finger span, and hence these camelback excesses are thought to have been instigated by one or either of the causing causes of all. Those rushy, hollow heroines in their skirt sleeves, be she McGretty, be she the Posk. Oh, because it is a horrible thing to have to say today. But one Delilah, Peter Lorette, shortly after in a fit of the unexpectednesses, drank carbolic with all her dear placid life before her, and paled off, while the other soiled dove, that's her sister-in-law, Lupercilla Touche, finding one day while dodging chores that she stripped easily for binocular men and that her jabs were just trying to see each other, the naughty girlie soon found her fruitful hat too small for her, and rapidly taking time, she rapidly took to necking, partying, selling her spare favours in the haymow or in lumber closets or in the green on ad hoc. There are certain intimacies in all ladies' lavish stories we just lease to imagination. Or in the sweet churchyard close itself for a bit of soft coal, or an array of thin trunks serving men fine that same hot cornial gala, which our own little Grania of the chill-eyed cheeks dished up to the great sire of Oscar and son of a cool, hoary of the coast of Emerald, of the recessive pogue, as Limal Muslim, the resigned to her surrender. Did not she come Leinster's even, true daughter of a dear mud? Her pitch was 40 steps in his perch old Cromwell's quarters, with so Valkyria licenses and many a poor pucker packing the perdition, aye, again and again, aye, and again. 'Tis Fredarium, 'tis fine away, 'tis fine away, hey, 'tis fine to topples, stop, dog of a yah, and allows me. And did not he, like Arco 40 far, far off Bissavollo misbrand her behaviours with iridescent you cry of downright mean, false, soft, lap, sick, dope. Devil's dreck. Reign of the she being queen of pranks. A kingly man, royal mien, regally robed, exalted be his glory. So gave, so take. No, not now. Just a minute. Except for trumpet. I thought he wanted. What? Here, living of the land. Hungry dinner. Hark! Here, eyes ravenous on her lippling lips. Year of wave day gone by. Years, say. But by the mere of his prophet he cannot answer. Up to potty to rise and shine. On his none shall he steal for Phoenicia or little Asia to obelize on the spout. Neither pub or clock, neither folkestone, nor sunkenness in Thomas Wood to bewray how our press gangs store of the rude. A mouth that tells not will ever attract the unthinking tongue, and so long as the obscene draws theirs which hear not, so long till all earth's damnation shall the blind lead to death. Tacho, tawny yeeklings. A column of lumps lends a pattern of leaves behind us. If violence to life, limbs and chattels, often as not has been the expression, direct all through an aged male, of womanhood offended, has not levy of blackmail from the time the fairies were in it. And fain for wild earth blossoms followed an impressive private reputation for whispered sins. By memory inspired, turn wheel again to the hold of the wall. Where giant blind fronts Pian Luamore, there was once upon a wall, and a hoog wall it was, and such a wall hole did exist. There are iron in our Lund, or you dares here, or you digging mosses, or your hoard of arts and oriots, the garb of the garden of Odin, and the lost palladays when all the Adams ended with Aves. Amen. The Doon is theirs, and still to see from menacing if he strikes a louse for it, and we'll come to those bare gay shoe shines if you just shut up a second. And let hogs be good old gaggers, and Istar Esther play Yaster Esther, in the dream of Sir Rest Asterius diseased. A stone-hinged gate then was for another thing, while the Sir Optimus had bought and enlarged that shack under fair rental of 1 yearling sheep, prime, value of 6pence, and 1 small yearling goat, cadet, value of 8pence, to grow old and happy, hogged and kid him, for the remnants of his years. And when everything was got up for the purpose, he put an applegate on the place, by no means as some pretext, a bedstead in lieu thereof to keep out donkeys. The pig dirt hanging from the jags to this hour makes that clear. And just then about's the iron gate, by cold custom left open to prevent the cats from getting at the goat, was triple padlocked on him on purpose by his faithful porters to keep him inside, probably and possibly an answer he felt like sticking out his chest too far and tempting gracious providence by a stroll on the people lads' egg day, unused as he was yet to being freely clodded. Oh, by the by, lest we brag of praties, and ought to be always remembered in connection with what has gone before, that there was a North rumour, heard that Defender out for his Zimmerhole digs, digging in at number 32 with the rum and punch and branch of Dirty Dick's free house in Lax Slip, where the Sockeye Sammers were stopping at the time orange fasting. Prior to that, a Commerzial, Gabordo Parker, he was reeking like Zentral oil rubber. From Ostrich, the USA paying, God save the mark, 11D in a week. Gosh, these holy Romans. of conscience money in the first deal of July while he was switching business with Bless Shore and swabbing broken Irishmen with broken douche, making his reportage on there for Adams for the Franco-Fertile Siding, a fastland paid ridicule, and there considered that one hand on him the Lynn O'Brien, Melton Ramswood disturbed. And why do they mind the same sort of chicken other they would, with 1,000 or about a cent ton of waters one monkey's damages become? Now you must know, Franksman, to make a heart of glass, that the game of gaze and bandstand butchery was merely a patsy strap tissue with threats and obuses such as Roebuck's Raffat and Pinnacle's Peak after this sort. Humphrey's unsolicited visitor, Davy or Titus, on the Bargley's clan march from the Middle West, a highly excellent, crude man about road who knew his Bullfast mountains like a starling bird. After doing a long dance untitled to Clardy Green, the posing is boxed up on the wake you may want me. After having blew some Quakers for you hoots into the house king's keyhole to attract attention, bleated through the gale outside, which the terror of his clothes was hog collaring. First, be the hair shooter, that he would break his bulgy wigger's head for him. Next, be the ale tapper, that he would break the gauge over his lanky duckling head the same way he would crack a nut with a monkey wrench. And last of all, be the stirred abouter, that he would give him his, the umperums or any bloody else's, decadent water to drink and his bloody stepbrothers into the bucket. He demanded more wood alcohol to pitch in with, alleging that his grandfather's was all taxis, and it was only after 10 O'Connell, and his bar was a public oven for the sake of her Skuski, and then not easily discouraged, opened the wrath floods of his artillery and went on at a wicked rate, weathering against him in mixed metaphors from 11:30 to 2 in the afternoon without even a luncheonette interval for house, son of Claude, to come out, you Jew beggar, to be executed on men. Dear Vicar, and pattern mine, that paradigmatic ear, receptor attentiveness of Dionysus, long-suffering, although whitening under restraint in the sitted-out corner of his conservatory, behind famine-built walls, his thermos flask and a Rapidian flabelle by his side, and a walrus whisker bristle for a toss-pick, compiled, while he mourned the flight of his wild geese, a long list, now feared and part lost, to be kept on file of all abusive names he was called. We have been compelled for the rejoicement of fine ladies and the humours of Milltown, etc., by Josephine Brewster in the collision known as the contrastations with Inkerman, and so on and so onward. Lacey's in Luwater Flea, Celestial's one clean turve, first nighter, informer, old fruit, yellow wigger, wheat ears, goldy guide, bogside beauty. Yes, we've had his bananas, York's porker, funny face, a baggety's bend he bumped, grease with the butter, open door auspices, Cain and Abler, Ireland's eighth wonderful wonder, beat by price, God's oilman, Moonface the murderer, hoary hairy hogs, midnight sunburst, remove that Bible, hebdramadory publication, Tomer the lame, the tyrannous, blow clay, tight before tea time. Rage or panta joke, acoustic disturbance. Thinks he's God blast, the good Duke of Argyll, W.D.'s Grace, gibbering behemoth of Dublin. His father was a Munzaker and she had him in a growler. Burnham and Bailey. Artist. Unworthy of the homely Protestant religion. Terry Cotter. You're welcome to Waterfoot, signed the Ribbon Men, Lobster Pot Lardling. All for Arthur of this town, hooshed the cat from the bacon, Leather Togs Donald, the A's and Jews of Pauper, and O'Reilly's delights to kiss the man behind the barrel, Magogajog, Swad Puddleford, Gouty Gibberly, Loose Luther, Hatches Cock's Eggs, Muddle the Plan, Look before wedlock, I divorce thee, husband. Tanner and a Meg. Go to Helena or come to Connie's. Puff, puff, piebald his bride. Purged out of Burke's. He's none of me causing. Barbarian. Peculiar person. Grunt House fact told him. 12 months aristocrat. Lycanthrope. Flunky beetle vamps a tune letting on his loney. Thunder and turf, married into Clondorf, left boot, sent on approval, Cumber of Lords, holy ground, Star Jarshman, Aunt Uke, Tommy Furlong's pet plagues, Archduke and Cabinger, last past the post. Keneally won't tell the off Nancy's gown, scuttle to cover, salary grab, Andy McNoon in Annie's room, all out. Twitch Brat's bras, Bombard Street Bester, Sublime Porter, a band for the King of the Bergens, and a band for you Sir of all the Rutledges, Phelan's cut price, and at number 111, what he done to Castle Costello, sleeps with feathers and ropes. It is known who sold Horace the Rattler, enclosed find the sons of Fingal, Sweden is fallen, wants a wife, and 40 of them. Let him do the fair. Happy Quani Chimuk, ploup goes his wassail. Ruin of the small trader, he Milk and Honey Beaver Brooker. He was a vintner, sour rapes, a meaning atrocity, sick fish, belly up, Edomite. Man devoid of the commoner characteristics of an Irish nature. Bad Humbug, Grand Rab, Cuckoo Handler, Dirt. Mitch and Daddy, born burst feet foremost, Woolworth's worst. Easy-ethic philosophist, guilty pig's bastard. Fast to the barrel, bills in the bed, Mr. Fatmate, in custody of the Paulus, Bell's elocutionist, deposed. But anarchistically respectful of the liberties of the non-invasive individual did not respond a solitary wedge word beyond such sedentarity, though it was as easy as kiss anywhere for the passive resistant in the booth he was in to reach for the Hello Gripes and ring up Kimmage Outer 1767 because, as the fundamentalists explained, when at last shocked into speech, touching his wounded feelings in the Fox Yard, the Dominican mission of the Socialist Party was on at the time, and he thought the Romish devotion known as the Holy Rosary might reform him. Gone. That more than considerably unpleasant bullocky before he rang off drunkishly, pegged a few gladstones all of a size by way of final max for his grapes, at the wicked in support of his words that he was not guilty, but after he had so strong a valet reconnoitring through his semi-subconsciousness and seriousness of what he might have done had he really polished off his terrible intentions finally caused him to change the ball and leave down all Grummel's Pebbles Pang Pong. And having sobered up a bit, paces his ground old diablin lion dub, the flay, the phlegm, the floaty flesh, pace, purty first, I splish the splume of the bar. This backblocks boor brusquely put out his language and quite quit the paleologic scene. Telling how by his self-denied Norns he had left Ireland under the setting table, after exhorting Earwicker, or in slightly modified phraseology, Messrs or Messrs Earwicker, sir, his feminizable name of multitude, come outside out of the muckaloo out of that for the honour of Crumlin, with his broody old flesh goods, God's curse to them, so as he could Brian slag and burst them all dizzy. You go bail like Potts Fracture did with Kettle Flatnose, and nobody at all with whole life famous, and Bill rocks over him, or if he didn't, for 32 Strawsby Campbell, he'd know what he wouldn't do for him, nor nobody else, no more nor him, after which battle martel, a Brisha Miller stroke of Bula, so the rage of Malbrook, playing on the least change of his Manchester's voice, the first heroic couplet from the fugual tropical, opus 42, my schemes into abeyance, for this time has had to fall. They bid good bite to their thumb, and his bandolier his soldier, drip drop on pool or polger, right in the loft of Philadelphia in the morning, proceeded with a hobble-forth slouch in his slips backwards, cool honey, in the directions of the duff and dim institutions about 10 or 1100 years lurch away in the moonshiny gorge of Patself on the Bach. Adio. And thus, with this Ratchily Exeter of Bullyacre, came to close that last stage in the siegings round our archer citadel, which we would like to recall, if old Nestor Alexis would wink the word for us, as Barla Duke, and Dog and Doris, and Bang and Up Zoom. Yet he made leave to many a door beside the Vaxman's wall, for so witnesses chambered cairns, a cloudlet litter silent at our brows uphill, and down coombe, on Eolith Straton, at Howth, or at Coolock, or even at Enniskerry. A theory none too rectilinear of a evaluation of human society, and a testament of the rocks from all the dead, and to some the living. Oliver's lambs we do call them, scatterlings of a stone, and they shall be gathered unto him, their herd and paladin, as nubilets to Cumule, in that day when, same the lightning lancer of Azeva Arthur honoured, some Finn avant, he skal wake from earth's sleep, out crested Elmer, in his vale of briars of Greenman's rise, oh, lost leaders live, the heroes return, and o'er Dun and Dale the Wolver Rover Lord protect us, his mighty horn skal roll, Ireland roll. For in those days his death shall ask of all Prohome, and call to him, all Prohome. And he make answer, that's so, nor wink nor wonk. Animadi Abelum. Mene creditist him Hartshorn. Silence was in thy Faust of halls, O Truiga, when thy green woods went dry. But there will be sounds of many mirth on the night's ear ringing, when our patriarch of comes town to Nobble gets the pullover on his boots. Liverpool, it's not a bit of it. His brain's cool porridge, his belt nassy, his heart's a drone, his blood streams a craw, his puff but a piff, his extremities extremely so. Fangless, palm broke, chill blame and bald owl. Humph is in his doge. Words weigh no more to him than rain drips to Rathfern him, which we all like. Rain when we sleep. Drops. But wait until our sleeping. Drain. Stop.